sandwich in a deli. All right, here we go. You ready?
Ready.
Yeah, wait. All right, here we go. Hey, Bulgaria, welcome to the Tablet Show! What? It's a circus. It's the Tablet Show circus.
It's a Bulgarian circus.
It is Bulgarian circus. Well, we're here taking a break from the road trip.
Yeah, this is our week off. So to take a week off, we flew to the other side of the world. What a great idea.
Don't
Who
know
thought
what
of
we're
this?
thinking, but
Yeah.
we're here.
Here we are.
We're
And
doing
it's DevReach.
Yeah, it's DevReach. Teleric's great conference that they do here every year.
Woo! And we have a throng in a beautiful theater. I love this space.
Yeah, I love it.
It's great.
And we're here with 3 esteemed guests, and we're going to be talking mobile. So I'm going to let John start by introducing himself, and we'll go down the line.
All right, I'm John Flanders. I'm also not from this part of the world, from Los Angeles, and I do a lot of mobile development. Been doing it for doing web development for a really long time, and doing a lot of mobile stuff the last couple of years.
Star of Stage, Screen, and O'Reilly Books.
I have written a couple of O'Reilly books,
Yeah. Okay, Brian?
I'm Brian Rinaldi. I actually came here from Boston, and I work for Adobe. I'm focused on their developer publication, the Adobe Developer Connection, but on HTML, JavaScript, CSS, and mobile topics.
Awesome.
Hi, my name is Chris Sells, and I work at Telerik. I've been doing Windows 8 development, which of course targets the tablets, as you know, for the last couple of years. I'm probably one of the most experienced Windows 8 developers there are, since GA doesn't happen for another 3 weeks,
Yeah.
right?
Here you are with a couple of years' experience of a product that hasn't shipped
Yeah,
yet.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? It's legacy by now, right, as far as Microsoft is concerned. Yeah, that's me.
And nobody here is wearing a $200 shirt. Just saying.
No, absolutely not. You can tell by looking at this shirt, not $200, no.
Nor fitted. No. Well, where do we start? Let's see.
So when we're talking about mobile, we are talking about both phones and tablets. Do we want to just, encompass that idea? Because there are still both mobile devices, right?
Well, actually, any computer is mobile if you have a big enough truck.
Well,
Nice.
yeah, if you can carry it.
Or
Sure.
backpack.
Long enough power cord.
If you can hold the whole thing in your hand, how about that?
I got really big hands.
Okay, you're just being difficult now.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Phones, tablets. I mean, if you look at even on the iPhone, which of course is where the latest wave of mobile development started, and then moved over to the Android, and someday hopefully we'll move over to Windows Phone as well. They don't even call it writing for the iPhone or writing for the iPad anymore. It's iOS.
Right.
Right. You write your iOS now, and theoretically, and in fact, on the iPad you can sort of run your iPhone apps. It doesn't really work. But
So I got a nice, specific, meaty question to start us off. So we've been talking a lot about PhoneGap. Chris and I have anyway, and just sort of outside on the porch. And PhoneGap is a very exciting technology, and a lot of people are behind it. I know you guys are too. And what I want to know is, where are those situations where we just can't use it? Where's the brick wall in PhoneGap?
I just love to have Brian answer that question. As a representative of Adobe, when should we not use your product?
Yeah. Hold on. Can I call marketing and answer first?
Yeah.
no marketing and no.
Well, let me ask. I could ask a more specific question. If you like.
Well, that one's fine. I mean, So where would the brick wall with PhoneGap? I think if you really need to eke every ounce of performance out of your app, then generally speaking, like PhoneGap isn't necessarily the perfect solution.
Yeah.
Like for instance, games. Oftentimes that PhoneGap probably isn't necessarily. I've seen games built on PhoneGap, but it isn't always the best solution.
Casual
for
games.
Casual
games.
Yeah, where really every ounce of performance
Okay.
matters, and where input lags and things like that can actually cause serious frustration. Because even though they're milliseconds, right? It's like
In a game that matters.
in a game that really matters. So that would be kind of the case. But I think the cases where you would want to use it is because you can target a bunch of platforms right off bat. I mean, you're not having to say build one app
Right.
for each platform, so you're not having to maintain all these different code bases.
Yep.
And and I have seen apps that actually do a really good job of squeezing performance. We often use the Untapped app as an example of an app that really behaves like native, and the performance is great. They've discussed how they've managed to squeeze out performance. There's lots of little tricks
Yeah.
and stuff that they did, but you can actually get really good native-like performance out of it. It's just that requires a little extra
Okay.
effort, right?
So my specific question is about background running apps. Can PhoneGap apps run in the background?
Are you talking about like TSRs, right?
No, well, yeah, sort of the TSR idea, but maybe something that could hook an event, a system-wide event, and wake up on that. Like an accelerometer or something.
Yeah, I don't think that PhoneGap will. The problem with that is that, I mean, I'm especially thinking from an iOS perspective, is that I don't think you'd be able to run you wouldn't be able to run the code in the
app
HTML,
itself,
and you
right.
wouldn't be able to run JavaScript because you don't have the main thread.
Right.
Everything UI related has to happen on the main thread.
And the plugin model for PhoneGap, does that work in the shim or does that work in the JavaScript HTML?
that works in the shim, the plugin model.
So you could
do it in
possibly
a plugin.
in a plugin.
Yeah, I mean, whatever limited background capabilities you have, which are
Right.
pretty limited
John,
on
you
most devices.
you tend to program natively on these different devices?
I pick and choose. I've developed HTML apps, or hybrid apps as they're called, what PhoneGap builds.
Right.
I've built native in terms of building iOS apps in Objective-C, Android apps in Java. One thing to remember about iOS is that you're talking about performance and PhoneGap. There's actually 3 levels of deep of performance, because you do HTML5 PhoneGap, and if you think you don't have enough performance, you can't eke it out, you could go to Objective-C. But remember, Objective-C is another runtime on top of the rest of the runtime.
Right.
And so a lot of people who really need to eke out performance go to C++. So the games that really, really need that performance
Actually go underneath Objective-C.
they don't use Objective-C at all.
Interesting.
They just use C++.
But we're
Okay.
talking for run-of-the-mill kind of business, apps that you'd run in your business, PhoneGap's going to work just great.
I think the majority of the time, yeah. The only issue that you run into is that when you talk about the plugin model.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, I was doing a PhoneGap app and I wanted to be able to have the camera come up in a certain way.
Yeah.
But that wasn't exposed with the PhoneGap API, because the PhoneGap API has to be generic enough to run on all those different devices.
Sure. Yeah.
So then the question is, do I just throw in some native code, or do I build a plugin? Do I really want to build a plugin for a one-off?
Mm-hmm.
So you get to those edge conditions where, yeah, PhoneGap exposes some part of the hardware, but it doesn't always expose all of it. For example, it doesn't expose my photo library. So if I want to build an application that plays a video or shows a photo from the device's photo library, I can't build that with PhoneGap.
Interesting.
But you could build the other parts of it with PhoneGap and then write a plugin for each platform. Is that what you need to do?
Exactly.
Yeah. Which, and it's better to write, I think it's better to write just a plugin than have to write a whole app for.
Well, except, I mean, sometimes you get to the point where, I need a plugin for this, I need a plugin for that, I need a plugin for this other thing,
Right.
and suddenly you're writing all of this native code, but you're writing that native code in a way that isn't how you normally write it. You're writing it to, patch,
Sure.
the underlying API that isn't, available in your
Yeah, would you write
technology.
one plugin per app, or would you write a reusable plugin that just is feature sort of oriented? So you actually are writing a lot of little plugins rather than one.
Actually, I'm curious, what does Adobe say about that kind
Yeah.
of edge condition?
About adding plugins?
Yeah, I mean, do I write it once per app and do one big plugin that just does all of the stuff I need the app to do, or should I be writing the open the camera in a certain way kind of plugin and use it across apps, or?
I don't know that I don't know. I'd have to consult with the PhoneGap team as far as what they'd recommend. I don't think they have a specific like we have a stance on whether you should do it. I mean, it's kind of what works best for your app.
I think plugins are more for the community.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like it's like a Facebook login plugin.
Yeah.
Right.
And there
So-
are a lot of them already out there. That you
Yeah,
can
absolutely. So if
sometimes
it's
see
something
things.
that you think like the community could reuse, then you put it out there as a plugin. But if not, you can just write code inside of the proper methods in the. I mean, when you build a PhoneGap app, if you build it, let's say, with Xcode, versus building it, let's say, with other products that just take your HTML, you can actually write any native code. So I can just write one function. I don't have to write a plugin. I can just write a method that does the thing I want and hook it up to JavaScript.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have to say, in my experience, right, the underneath, right, the PhoneGap API that gets to the platform, and PhoneGap does a really good job of implementing their API across all the platforms they support. But that's like the bottom part of your app, and the top part of your app is you can write in a pretty specific way. It's Apple, and because Android just cloned Apple, right? It's easy to flip some style bits, and boom, now the toolbar's on the top. Hey, now it's Android, right?
Right.
I mean, that's pretty easy to do.
Yeah.
But when it comes to, and I've been in a lot of conversations lately where the real question is, well, if I want to, I mean, the goal, of course, is I want to write that app once and deploy it everywhere. And of course I can do it for the tablets and the phones for iOS and Android, right? That PhoneGap is great at that. There are controls in the world that flip the bits and make it look native. That's great. But when you come across a user interface that is vastly different, that the vendor decides to make recommendations that are vastly different, and of course I'm talking about the Metro style UI on Windows Phone and Windows 8, suddenly, even PhoneGap can, and I'm sure will, provide me the bottom layer, but the top layer, how do I write that? Right? How do I actually write my app in a way that works across all of these platforms?
You may have to have another app there. Yeah.
Well, and that's the thing, right?
And do you care?
Do I care?
Well, you care. I know you care.
No. I care because
The 2% of the people in the world that have a Windows
yes,
phone.
I understand.
Okay.
I understand. Yes, let's take a pot shot at Microsoft. Absolutely,
It's just
right?
facts.
No, right now, totally doesn't matter, right? There are no Windows 8 users. There are no Windows Phone 8 users. Absolutely, hasn't been released yet, right? And there are relatively few, very few Windows Phone 7. Absolutely not a problem.
And even less Windows Phone 7 because Windows 8 is coming.
Absolutely, they really did a good job there, didn't they?
Yeah, they did.
Yes, absolutely.
Ouch.
So, but my question is, theoretically, if this were to happen, if, say, Microsoft was to ship 300 or 400 million PCs running Windows 8 next year, which is their plan, their stated goal, right? Is there a way that we can still keep that, write the app once and deploy it?
Well, yeah, I mean, as Carl said, maybe write another app, but I mean, on Windows 8, since I took a pot shot at Microsoft, let me give Microsoft big props for WinJS, right?
That's your work, Mr. Shaw.
Yeah, you had something to do with that.
I mean,
wrote
you
the whole
don't
thing
need
up.
PhoneGap on Windows 8
You do not need PhoneGap on Windows
to
8.
get to the APIs, because all the APIs are open to you.
Hang on, but you do not need PhoneGap on Windows 8 if you're going to write, all you want to do is write HTML and JavaScript and CSS and be a first class, Windows 8 app. That's totally true, right? But if you want to have the goal of write the app once and just deploy it, which is what PhoneGap now allows with iOS and Android in a very reasonable way, that is the goal that I'm losing.
But it's still, it's just to be clear here, you still end up with separate compilations for each device.
Absolutely, you do.
As soon as we go down with PhoneGap,
I think
we go down the
he's-
plugin path, there's these.
Right, but he's more discussing, you're thinking look and feel type issues, right?
Yeah,
Like-
I'm definitely talking, the Metro style. It's hard to imagine writing an app that looks great and native, because that's the goal, right? We want to use PhoneGap to write apps that you cannot tell from the native apps that run on the platform. It's hard to imagine writing that would work equally well on Windows 8 and, the iPad.
So has anybody written a JavaScript library that does the Metro look and feel with tiles and all of that stuff?
I believe the answer, I don't even have to Google. The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Anything that can be written in JavaScript will be written in JavaScript. Absolutely, that's the rule. And I can't, coding horror. That's a quote from codinghorror.com.
Yeah.
It's not actually a JavaScript issue, it's more of a CSS issue.
Yeah.
The question is, can I abstract, build my CSS and HTML in such a way in PhoneGap that by switching out a CSS file, I can have a Metro style looking app?
Yeah, that's an interesting
Wow, that is an
possibility.
interesting idea.
Because many of the navigation metaphors are different. They're dramatically different.
Yeah,
style.
and in fact, Microsoft did that on purpose, right? They
Right.
looked at the iPhone and said, okay, we see how the iPhone has done it, and they've been very successful, but we don't want to copy them, right? We want to be even better. And we can argue whether they succeeded or not. Certainly the people with money have argued that they're not better. I happen to really like my Windows Phone.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. What matters is they're very different. And that same UI metaphor now has made it into Windows 8. And Windows 8 has a much greater possibility of having literally hundreds of millions of users.
Sure.
Right? Just by the sheer number of people who buy PCs every year, and Microsoft is going to ship Windows 8 on them. That's just how that's going to go. So, that being the case, is it reasonable for us to expect? I mean, obviously, PhoneGap alone is not enough, right? PhoneGap can absolutely provide the implementation of its API in Windows 8, Windows Phone 8, not a problem. Question is, can you do the top end? And I don't know the answer.
Yeah, well, I don't think it makes sense right now. Really, we're gonna have to struggle with that to actually try things on. I mean, the only case where I would sacrifice that UI experience is that I'm building an internal business app where it's expected to look the same on every device, and I think PhoneGap will probably deliver on that just fine.
My viewpoint of using PhoneGap and using HTML and JavaScript CSS is a little bit different. Chris is talking about the write once and run everywhere. To me, it's just skill reuse. So to me, the advantage of sitting down to say, well, how am I going to build this app that I want to ship in the app stores or give out to my enterprise? Do I have a bunch of developers who can write code in Objective-C and Java? Well, then maybe I just go native. But likely, most companies have people who can do HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So I can take those skills and I can get those skills and reuse the skills that they already have to build my mobile sort of,
So you actually
my mobile strategy.
and
I don't necessarily think, when I think about PhoneGap, I don't think about writing once and building for every platform and shipping.
So you would actually use PhoneGap even though you're only building an iOS app?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
And you want that because you don't like Objective-C and you don't like the
I love
interface builder.
Objective-C.
Really?
I love
Yeah.
interface builder.
So I want that because I don't like Objective-C. Me specifically, I do not.
I love Objective-C and I love Interface Builder.
That's interesting you say that. I have suddenly less respect for you.
Been a little bit silent over there on this PhoneGap conversation, Brian.
Oh yeah, I'm just enjoying the show.
Okay, he's
here
just
myself.
watching the mud fly. He's got a good perspective.
Well, and I mean, the other issue around this, and I think we should talk a little bit about Cordova, just because I like what's been going on there with being able to not own a Mac. Like get away from some of these requirements for building iOS apps. That's not a non-trivial thing.
Right. I mean, that's definitely true. Especially, obviously, there's some limitations, but PhoneGap Build now you can just deploy, like you can actually just push your code to the cloud and then have those builds made for you. So you don't even you don't need any particular, like you don't need a Mac or anything to deploy to all these. The limitations being some of these things like plugins and things like that aren't yet supported, but this is a 1.0, so hopefully in the future you'll see some of these things come out.
Because the implication of PhoneGap is that it was a temporary product.
There's a stopgap.
Right. That's and they the PhoneGap team still says that is their goal. Like they would rather you never need to use this. They want you creating web apps that can actually access them. And some of that, I mean, that's improving on a regular basis. There are more and more things we can access. It's just
For example, the location services in your browser,
exactly,
right?
yeah.
Right.
Out of the box, you don't need the GPS functionality from PhoneGap. It's just a part of the HTML standard and
Right.
JavaScript.
Right.
And so what you're saying is, PhoneGap is just there until the vendors catch up and the standards catch up, and so we all have a way to access all of these resources.
Right.
That are
That's
common.
what they always stated was their goal was this is a temporary solution. Whether, obviously I think, there may always be things that we need to, have PhoneGap to access.
Well,
But hopefully there are less and less things, you can build this as a web app and still access most of the things you need.
Well, actually, that's funny because if you look, oh God, I can't believe I'm going to say this.
What?
I don't mean this in any kind of negative way, but you can think of PhoneGap as the new Silverlight.
Nice.
And the reason I say that is because
I mean, the new old Silverlight? Or
No.
the new Silverlight?
hang on, let me tell you.
I think Adobe Marketing's just buzzing me to get off this. Get off
Brian had a
stage
job.
right now.
He used to have a job.
So the reason I say that is because Silverlight, like Flash, right? They're both the same kind of thing. Which single vendor, they could run ahead far faster
Sure.
than the standards bodies could ever push on the browser vendors to expose this functionality, right? And so in that same way, PhoneGap is, as the standard gets better and the functionality gets better in the core, right? PhoneGap will no longer have to do that, but there will always be other things,
Keep
right?
running ahead.
That will keep running ahead in a good way. See, it's like Silverlight in a good way.
Nice.
Okay, I'll take that. Although, the other thing is that sometimes, they answer you want an app because you want to be able to be found in the App Store. You want to, and so that obviously, that one of the difficulties with a web page is just findability.
Also the pay aspect. People won't pay for a web app, but they will pay for something they have to install, even if it's just a wrapper over a browser.
How ironic that installing sucks, right? And just accessing the app directly is fabulous, and they'd rather pay for the thing that sucks.
Yeah. You bring up, this whole wrapping a web thing. You got to tell the story about the old days of VB with the web control, because this remember any VB programmers, we used to have this ActiveX or COM control that was the web browser. It was like a little view of IE, and you could just drop this on a Windows form and navigate to any web browser, and you got a browser basically.
That's PhoneGap.
That's PhoneGap, right? So
Yeah, that's PhoneGap. And by the way, it's still there in XAML in Windows 8 applications today. Absolutely, still there.
So, but
It was we had a customer who hated IE. And this is back when that wasn't a cool thing to be.
Yeah,
It's
that's everyone now,
They only
right?
wanted Netscape on their
Right.
machine, and they had it was a couple of thousand seats. So deployment was really a problem. This is the early '90s, so this is back in the suffering days of that. And we suddenly had this brainstorm and built a VB app that we just embedded the browser into, made a new icon so that it was safe, and they were astonished that we shipped 4 or 5 versions over the next couple of years and never had to roll anything out to the client. They were just amazed.
Right, because you were able to use the deployment capabilities, right? The whole app
it's
was
all
just
smoke
pulled
and
down.
mirrors, man.
Right.
It's
It was
all
just magic.
yeah. So it's all about how you frame your application.
It's all about how you iframe your application.
Well, that still is another advantage to doing a hybrid mobile app, which is, the PhoneGap tools sort of gear you towards embedding all your HTML and CSS images in the binary.
Right.
But you don't have to, right?
You could be fetching over the wire to get that stuff.
Yeah, I built apps like that. Or you can do a combination where the first few screens are all embedded, then all the rest of the information for the app, all the rest of the UI gets downloaded on demand, and then you add that with things like the local storage and offline app cache, and you can even have an offline app, and then when it goes online, you can update yourself. So you can roll out bug fixes on, I have actually rolled out bug fixes on apps I have in the App Store without sending a new app to the App Store, just by changing the server.
I mean, we've really blurred the line then between what is native and what is quote-unquote hybrid. Because you really can almost be anything. And the only thing we know for sure is that real native doesn't have any of this. But I've seen
Not
a bunch
necessarily,
of
I don't know, not in iOS 6, but before iOS 6, the iOS App Store app was a hybrid app.
Right.
So really, the UI, it was HTML?
Yeah.
Wow, cool.
I wanna
Even
get-
they don't like Objective-C, and you do?
Boom. I want to get back to this idea of what's available to you at the plugin level, because I'm really interested in finding out those scenarios where the brick wall is. And so, if I wanted to write something that you said, the JavaScript and all that stuff doesn't run on the main thread. So when a plugin gets activated, does that have to be specifically activated by the user? Or is that something that can run at startup? Is that...
It's just built into the binary.
Yeah.
So basically, it's
What's
a library.
the entry point?
I forget. In PhoneGap, I think it's it's like, well, I don't know very much about the other platforms, but in iOS and Objective-C, it's just like a callback.
Okay.
It's like
So you
well-defined
can- yeah.
interface.
All right, so you can set up a callback when the app runs, for example, get and hook that. So if I'm running on the main thread right there, I'm in the native platform, so I can do whatever I want.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you sort of do get the best of both worlds. You don't have to write your whole application in in the native thing, but
Right.
the plugin architecture, you can just trying to figure out where's the bonk point with plugins.
And I was just teaching a class a couple weeks ago at a consumer, like the freecreditreport.com people, and their app, one of their pages in their iOS app is the UI web view, which is the web browser control,
Right.
and it links to some settings page that they also have on their website. So it's just one, right? So they have 20 screens in their app, and one of them is HTML. Because it just made sense. Why would they rebuild that when they already had it on the web?
So they adjust their settings on the web, so it's always just in one place, and then they probably pull those settings back down from the web service behind it to make their client.
Yeah, so I mean,
responsive.
we say that the App Store has HTML elements in it, but it's not fully hybrid, right? It just has some of the UI elements are driven by HTML. So when you say the lines are blurred, I think the lines are really blurred.
Right.
Because if you could build something with PhoneGap and then decide, this particular page or view doesn't have the performance I want. Well, if you wanted to, you could just go in and make it native too.
Right.
So I think, to me, I think it is the best of both worlds, and you can kind of pick and choose and go in however deep you want.
And if you're talking about what does PhoneGap really excel at, is it really just the sort of the screens, the UI, the stuff, the tedious stuff that that's more difficult, or
PhoneGap doesn't do any of that.
Doesn't do any of that.
What PhoneGap does is just makes it so you don't have to learn anything about Objective-C or Java or Xcode or Eclipse.
Or
So
in
you're- so
most
you're-
of the case, you don't even have to learn about the API of the native platform.
And you
really-
don't
it's
have to.
really
Right, you're just programming
PhoneGap
against the PhoneGap API, which
Right.
then maps
So
differently.
you're really just truly the middle tier, right? You're handling events from click events and text
Correct.
input and all that. You're doing the sending through the web services and getting your data. You're populating the screens. You're doing all the real stuff of the app, but none of the...
Yeah, it's just like you
UI.
were writing like a web application, right?
Just-
That
it's
hosted
just like-
on foo.com.
Just like your VB app
Yep.
of old.
Yeah.
Do you get to certain circumstances where you've got to do if I'm iOS, do this, if I'm Android, do that?
Or is it capabilities more? Can I do this? Can I do that?
I've seen some, like, for instance, the example I used earlier about Untapped. He in an article he wrote for us actually talks about some cases where he did put some if iOS code in there.
Right.
A lot of that was actually UI related, so
Yeah.
so
Well,
it wasn't necessarily like
Thinking back to
capabilities,
Chris's
but
whole complaint about if you're going to
There-
do this on phone 7 or phone 8, you might want to have I'm in phone 8, use these UI
Yeah.
elements this way, but
Right.
still trying to maintain a
But
common
there-
code base.
Yeah, I mean, so the capabilities you would test the capability, not I don't think you would write like
Right.
if. Right? You test
I don't know how you
the
measure the capability of I'm in a phone 8.
Oh, well, that's actually easy, right? I mean, you don't want to test the capabilities of, that's not a capability test, that's an OS check, right?
Right.
The way you test the capability is simply, hey, ultimately I'm programming against a JavaScript API, and I've either got the implementation of my plugin that provides this functionality, or I don't.
Right.
And it's super easy in JavaScript to say, if this function exists, right?
Use
Call
it.
it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I don't have that functionality, and on I go, right?
Move on. Very good.
Super easy to do. And it's funny too because we've been talking about PhoneGap as a kind of a stopgap until the browser vendors who also provide the embedded browser that we build our PhoneGaps on.
Right.
Our PhoneGap apps on. until they add more and more capabilities, and they're certainly doing that over time. But I think of it based on what John was saying in terms of asset and skill reuse. I wonder if PhoneGap isn't just there until all the platform vendors make HTML and JavaScript and CSS a first-class citizen in the I want to build an app, right? I mean,
allow Windows 8.
Yeah, Windows 8 did it, and of course Mozilla has a project, and WebOS does it, and more people are not, reinventing yet another UI layer, yet another forms package, yet another animation layer, blah, blah, blah. They're just saying, well, people already know HTML and CSS and JavaScript. Why don't we just make that work?
Right.
And that is a fabulous answer.
Right. So you're saying you expect Apple to take Microsoft's lead? Is it?
I don't expect Apple to take anyone's lead.
I would hope so, although it may be a couple of years before the hardware catches up to be able to do that successfully, because of course having it on a tablet, it's much easier to have hardware that's good enough to do it all in JavaScript and things like that. But I would say also it's interesting that Microsoft didn't follow Microsoft on that, because that capability is not going to be in Windows Phone 8, which actually I would have liked.
That's true. Windows Phone 8 does not have that. You're absolutely right.
Sure is interesting. Do you think if PhoneGap gains enough traction and Apple starts seeing more PhoneGap applications than native applications in their store, let's say, that might provide some incentive for them to sort of own the space?
Maybe, but I mean, Apple suggests to people to build apps that way.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
It's not like they're telling people don't build apps that way.
No, sure.
Which is
They think
that
that
is a
people
change
should.
in policy too. For a long, there was that whole debate when
Right.
PhoneGap first showed up of this is against the developers agreement for iPhone, that you had to build everything with their tools their way.
They banned it, then they went back.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was a PhoneGap issue as much as it was a monotouch issue.
Or was it
Yep.
or
That was
Unity
Mono
3D?
Touch.
It was definitely mono.
Mono was the one.
The thing with
It was a Flash issue too.
and a Flash.
Was a
The-
Flash.
yeah, that was around the same time we
Right.
released the Flash compiler that would compile.
Compile
right.
into
It was
Xcode.
That was when they
Yes,
ran it.
that's when Apple flipped out.
Yeah. So.
Well, it was Steve Jobs who flipped out.
Yeah. But
That's what I said.
They ended up backtracking on that even.
Yeah, but
you
and
can't do it now.
I'm always fascinated that Apple, for as much as we may harass them for their arrogance, just change gears. Just go with, I mean, I remember when Jobs said, if you're going to build apps for the iPhone, you'll build them in Safari. Until Jailbreak came along and said, oh no, we're going to put our apps on your phone. And that's where the App Store and Xcode and all that stuff actually came from. They were never going to intend to release that stuff. They put it out because the customer demanded it. The customer
How
engineered it right.
ironic that App Store was so flippin' popular.
Billions.
And it has changed the mobile landscape forever.
Yeah,
and in
sure.
fact, so much so that it affected the desktop landscape, right? Because with
Windows
Windows 8,
is an app store.
absolutely, an app store for laptops and desktops and tablets alike.
Yeah, a conversation I had with Mark Rasinovich around this, where he's focused on the security side of the App Store, saying this is about whitelisting apps, not install whatever you want. We'll try and figure out if it does harm. These are curated, and any app that's in that store is safe.
Yeah, as opposed to the internet, which is
Yeah.
Run
Run this
relatively.
install
true
wizard
on
and
Android?
cross yourself.
That's not true on Android, but it is true on the newest version of OS X. Unless you turn off a setting, you can only install apps from the App Store. on
oh,
OS
really?
X.
So
Wow.
that is the wow.
That is the model
It
for,
is kind of
for macOS too.
Well, and I bet everybody sitting here does tech support for their family. This is about quality of life for us, guys.
Yeah,
Like,
it's-
that's all it is.
Yeah, yeah.
We're now, it's like I want to hand out ARM tablets to my family because they just can't mess them up. I get fewer calls.
Right.
It's like, guess what the Christmas presents are this year?
Except-
now leave me alone.
Oh,
This
right.
is the gift that gives back to me.
So I like that. That's awesome. Except when my stepmom, who is 98 of my tech support calls, right? Whenever I call to talk to my dad, I first have to talk to my mom's or stepmom, work through all of her tech support issues,
Nice.
and then I'm allowed to talk to my father, right? Who has all the same issues. He's just too proud to ask me about them, which I prefer. That's a model I prefer. But I recommended to her that she get an iPad for that very reason,
Right.
right? This is a year ago, right before the Windows tablets were on their way. And I said, get yourself an iPad, reduce the support burden for me. She bought one. She called me up and she said, where do I put my DVDs?
Because she watches movies on it.
Yes, she does.
Yes.
Absolutely. She wanted to watch, and she had these old recordings that, I mean, it was almost, where do I put my VHS, right?
Yeah.
But it was, where do I put my DVDs? And I said, maybe a laptop is okay for you. Yeah.
That, or you're going to be responsible for ripping all those DVDs.
Oh, yeah.
into
No,
APIs.
no, that's not going to happen. No.
Nice.
So let's focus on the other side of mobile development, which is mobile web, HTML5. Well, why don't we start with Kendo UI? I mean, we haven't talked about that in a while. It's been at least a week.
What would you like to hear about Kendo UI?
Well, just
Carl?
tell us all what it is.
So Kendo UI is a set of JavaScript controls and a kind of an end-to-end app framework. The idea is, when you're building apps with not just websites, but apps with JavaScript and HTML and CSS, that there are a lot of, you generally start with jQuery, and then maybe you add some knockout or underscore, and you bring in this library or that library and this extension and that extension. Maybe you pull in jQuery UI, right? Some of those controls, right? It's kind of a pick and choose, and that's fine. But what happens is sometimes they don't work very well together, or they have very different programming models, and it's kind of hard to keep all that in your head. Right, so the idea of Kendo UI is start with jQuery. Everyone likes jQuery, and then build on top of that
Really?
a set of yes, they do. Yes, well, again, but you like Objective C, right?
Do you know that 40% of the lines of code in the jQuery library are there just for IE6?
IE6. I know that. Yes, I thank you.
There's
But you
slight
look at me
performance
like-
issues with jQuery.
It's not like I'm in favor of IE6 or ever was it on that anyway. Whatever.
Friends don't let friends run IE6.
Right. So the idea of Kendo UI is it's built on top of jQuery, and then a set of these common services, globalization and localization and storage and data binding and these kinds of things that you would normally pull in onesie-twosies, but they're all with a consistent model, right? They all work together, right? So if you kind of adopt this jQuery Kendo UI style, you can write your whole app that way, and that's the whole point. And then on top of that, we have a rich set of controls, which is of course one of the things that Telerik is well known for.
So can you marry the two? Can you marry Kendo and PhoneGap?
Oh, absolutely. You can marry Kendo and PhoneGap, and specifically in fact, probably Todd's in the audience now, who's in charge of Kendo UI, and he's watching my every answer to see if I get this right. But the idea is one of the beauty and wonders that is Kendo UI is there's a package called Kendo UI Mobile, and the idea here is there is a set of controls that when you run either as a standalone app hosted in PhoneGap or on a website using these set of controls. If you're running on iOS, the controls all look like iOS. And if you're running on Android, the controls all look like Android. And in fact, flipping the location of this menu or that toolbar to be more in line with the style UI guidelines. And the goal, Todd's goal, and as far as I can tell, he's absolutely attained it, is can we build hybrid apps that look just like iOS when they're running on iOS, no different, you can't tell, and Android look like Android, no different, you can't tell, and when I look at the stuff they built, I'm constantly amazed at how well they've made that work.
Well, and I'm calling back to a show we recorded with Todd Englund that the recording itself failed,
Right.
so we've never been able to publish a show. Someday we'll reshoot it.
We will reshoot that
But
show.
he talked about you have to get that exactly right, or you fall into this uncanny valley. This just like the
right.
robots.
Yes,
when
yes,
robots
yes.
are too human but not quite human, everybody's uncomfortable with it.
Right,
It's like
right,
if
right.
you're going to simulate iOS and you just get a few things wrong.
Yeah, you're off by pixels, mere pixels.
And timing too. I think that's the big one when we deal with
timing.
web apps. Is
Right.
I'm used to with a native app. I hit the button bloody works.
Or it
Right.
makes noise or tells you
Something.
that you've pressed it or
You've
something.
got to have that if you're really going to do this. It's pretty easy to tell you're on a web app when stuff's unnaturally slow.
Right.
It's almost
Right,
a
right.
giveaway every time.
Right.
And mobile devices, I think, still struggle with this.
Yeah. On the other hand, the things that I've seen, I'm amazed how well it works. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not perfect, but it's pretty damn close, and they're always working to make it harder.
So how
Or
does this
better.
work? Because we were talking about PhoneGap not being the UI side, that with PhoneGap you're using your native designers for UI, but Kendo UI is UI.
Yeah,
So
the Kendo UI is the top end that says I can write, and it's a library like Kendo UI that allows you to say, okay, I'm going to write PhoneGap, so all the system level calls I'll call and it'll work on iOS or iPhone or Android just fine, and then I can write my UI once.
So
and it'll switch
you're
looks.
truly saying that I do not need to use Xcode to make my
Right, and that's the goal.
UI.
Well, except, I mean, again, Xcode still has its place when it's, the kind of scenarios that John was talking about, right? There's OS-specific functionality that you want access to that PhoneGap doesn't yet expose.
Wow.
Edit point.
Okay.
And then so for those who've never seen us make the sausage before, when we say edit point, that tells the editor, don't leave this in the show. So, Brandon, don't leave this in the show. If you have a question, put up your hand. I will run out to you with the microphone, and we can get you on the show and get a question to the panelists as well. So,
First of all, does anybody have a question right now?
before we go back in.
There's one up there.
Do you have to close your edit point tag?
All right.
Hey,
You want to call it out?
Meta question.
wait,
That was
wait,
actually a
before-
question. That was a
before you-
question about questions.
before
That's
you-
awesome.
Do we have to close our edit point? Brian, you don't have to stay. I'm sorry, I had the light right in my eyes. Who had a question? There's over there.
Look at
All
how
right.
spry he
All right,
is.
so
Look at
this
him run up those stairs.
so this will be the end of the edit point.
There we go. Coming out of the edit point. Hi, what's your name? Where are you from?
Apostle Postov, I'm from Bulgaria, from Plovdiv.
And what's your question?
What's your opinion about MonoTouch and Android for Mono for Android?
The Xamarin products. I can't believe we haven't brought those up.
Yep.
Gentlemen, the Xamarin products.
So I've actually, I'm a huge fan of MonoTouch. I have to say I experimented in college with iOS, right? It was
Didn't
done
handle.
tastefully. I needed the money, right? And I did some Objective-C programming and I wrote some apps. And then I took one of those apps and I'm, a C# guy at heart, right? That to me, I've yet to find a language I like more than C#. And so I moved it over to MonoTouch. And mostly that was an exercise in the interface builder worked better with MonoTouch than it did with Objective-C. And I threw away half my code.
How long ago was this?
This was, I want to say, 3 years. 3 years ago.
So there's like 4 new versions of Interface Builder since then. Just so you know.
Okay. And so they're all better.
Oh yeah,
That's
well, it's
fixed
better
all
than
that.
it used to be.
Yeah, okay.
And I think you really get back to this idea that Apple never intended the public developers to use those tools, and so they had to rev them very quickly to make them what they should have been. And now they're apparently pretty good. Not that I'm an Xcode programmer or interface builder, but
The interface builder looks
they're
really
dramatically
amazing.
better.
Yeah. On my view of MonoTouch, unfortunately, I have a very negative view of MonoTouch. And that's because I put in my credit card information the day before Novell killed MonoTouch. So I put in my credit card information to buy MonoTouch
Right.
and Monodroid and to download it, and it was the day before. So they charged me, but I was never able to download the product.
Really? So Xamarin, of course, doesn't have that information because it was in Novell.
Yeah, sure.
So it's personal for you.
Well, not only that, but when
I'll
you,
write you a check, John. How much
but
are
when
we
you
talking
think about it, I mean, the Xamarin guys certainly seem to be doing really well.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're going to go away. On the other hand, when you look at companies and the amount of stability that Apple has, Adobe has, Microsoft has, I'm not sure that I would want to bet on picking a company like Xamarin.
Man, I'm surprised you say Apple's that stable. Apple skipped out of, just missed bankruptcy just a few years ago. You know, they may have a pile of money right now, but they've only got a product that's killing.
So Interface Builder creates files that are called nib files.
Nib.
Do you know what nib stands for?
No.
Do you know what nib stands for?
It's the new interface builder.
No,
file.
next step.
Oh, right.
Next
Oh,
step
that's
interface.
right.
Oh.
That's right.
Yeah, they still
So
have that.
stability in terms of these tools have actually been around
Incredibly
for a really
persistent
long
is
time.
what they
Yeah.
are.
Right.
Core data, which is the way that
And
you
we
can
cannot hate the Next because the very first web server in the whole world was a Next. I have seen that very machine.
Oh,
It is
yeah.
in a case at CERN.
Yeah, and with the interfaces they were able to build with like 4 colors still amazes me. I'm a huge Next fan, absolutely.
Finish your point about the core data.
Well, core data is the part of iOS that you can use to do persistence, and they've also been doing that for years.
Yeah.
I used to work at a consulting company with another friend of Chris's and I, Peter Clark.
Peter Clark, hey.
Where they used to use web objects. Some people still use web objects. Web objects is an Objective-C framework for building dynamic websites. And that would use a back end that would, they had paging where you'd get to the 10th object in your loop, and then it would go get the next 10 from the database. So they've had a lot of really good stuff for a long time.
And I think you bring up a really powerful point, which is Objective-C was newly invented for the iPhone. This is a language that's been around for a long time.
Since the early, it was like, 81 or 82 or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've disliked it ever since. Let's be clear.
So this is a hatred that goes well beyond phones.
Yeah, and it's funny too. I say I'm a C# guy, and I am, right? That's my favorite.
Sure.
I like pressing the dot and having a reliable list of things that I can do at that point, right? IntelliSense. I've never been able to give it up. And I really enjoyed my monotouch experience.
Xcode has great IntelliSense, by the way.
Oh,
it's not
excellent.
called IntelliSense.
Oh, excellent. But I will say that as much as I love C# and as much as I enjoyed my monotouch experience, it seems like the world is going a different way. It seems like the world has chosen JavaScript, and HTML, and CSS. So when the other day I was
You think
talking
we could fix the name?
what
Yeah.
JavaScript?
Yeah.
Microsoft fixed the name a couple of days ago. It's now called TypeScript.
Okay, now everything's better. So for those who've never heard of TypeScript, do you think you can give it justice?
Absolutely. So the idea of TypeScript is this is the invention of Anders Heilsberg, who also is the inventor of C#. So already I like it. Right.
According to Lino, a great squash player.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know his how much he liked vegetables of any kind.
Yes.
So there you go. But what he did was he took JavaScript and he extended it. So every JavaScript file that exists in the universe today is also legal TypeScript.
Okay.
And then what you can do is you can put in optional annotations, right? So for example, you can say, hey, this variable that I'm passing into this function is a string. And I would like you to, Mr. Compiler and Mr. Tools, if you could help me track down where I'm calling it in a way that is illegal. And so all of those what the compiler, the TypeScript compiler does, all it does is go through and check all those annotations, and then it layers in some extra features like the proposed ECMAScript 6 class keyword and that construct, and it puts those in the language, and then the compiler just generates ECMAScript 5 code. And then it gives you warnings that says, by the way, you're violating all of those annotations you put in, or you're using variables you haven't declared, or et cetera, et cetera. It still generates the JavaScript because JavaScript is dynamic and can do all kinds of things, even if statically it doesn't look right. But what it does is it allows you, if you want to, like a C# programmer might want to, be much more specific about the interface between things. And classes and modules, and add these features that all have matching constructs in JavaScript that we know and love today, and it just layers those additional things on top.
Now, is TypeScript a Microsoft-only technology?
TypeScript was invented and released by Microsoft and maintained, and they make it work inside of Visual Studio 2012, but they've released it as open source. They've released command line compiler. They've made sure it works with Node.js. Right, they are pushing it to be anywhere you can use JavaScript today, you can use TypeScript.
So now it's really up to the implementations in the browsers to.
Oh no, that's the beauty. No browser needs to change. Node.js does not need to change because it all compiles down to JavaScript that is already working everywhere. In fact, today, I was able to write TypeScript.
Did you say it compiles to JavaScript?
Yes.
There's a lot of. This is actually really. It's surprising how many tools there are out there. I mean, CoffeeScript would be the big one, right?
Hundreds.
But there are tons of compiled to JavaScript. Whatever language you want to code in,
Sure.
there's probably a project out there to compile it to JavaScript. I was maintaining a list of them, and it's gotten huge.
It's out of control.
There's a lot. There's a new one. Seems like every day somebody sends me.
Well, and I still want to go back to the question around the Xamarin products, because clearly Miguel de Icaza and crew love C#.
We do.
And C#'s a phenomenal language. Don't you want to keep programming in it? Isn't there something better about C# than there is about JavaScript?
So there are lots of things from a language point of view that I much prefer in C# over JavaScript. On the other hand, I can sit down at my grandmother's computer and open up Notepad and write and deploy and debug JavaScript, right? It's pure ubiquity
Yeah.
is its number one strength.
Yep.
Right? C#, as much as I love it, cannot approach the ubiquity of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS.
Yep.
That's what we used to say about Flash too, I guess.
And it used to be true. It used to be true about Flash. Absolutely.
Wait, can I add in an edit point there?
I love that. We need to keep that. That's awesome.
That's lovely. Guys, I think that's a show.
That's a good show.
Wow, that's a show? Wow.
Let's hear it for our panel. Hey, we'll see you next time on the Tablet Show.
Awesome.
Now I'm gonna go drink some rakia.
Oh,
Tonight, not now.
it's 6 o'clock. It's tonight.
Oh, it is tonight. Great.
I thought
You guys had a great first day of the conference. See you all tomorrow.
Yep.